Welcome to the Solo Mo Show, a weekly podcast hosted by Corey O'Brien, the social media strategist at Heat and author of thefutureofads.com.
And I'm Adam Helway, CEO of the digital marketing agency Secret Sushi Creative.
Each episode, we discuss topics, trends, and tactics related to social, local, and mobile marketing. Our goal is to help you understand these topics so you can integrate them into your own efforts. Today is June 26th, 2012, and this is episode number 25.
In this episode, we'll take a deep dive into Twitter, looking at how you can take advantage of recent changes and what the future looks like for the network.
Sounds like a good one. We are taking a deep dive indeed. We got all kinds of crazy Twitter news, which is funny because you don't really think that Twitter changes that much, but I guess over the last couple months they decided that this was the year they were going to announce new features. They were going to shake things up, huh?
Yeah, I think we've discussed in the past that they've always been a little bit of a laggard as of the last, say, I don't know, year or two, when we always seem to, associate Facebook with an ever-changing user interface and all kinds of announcements, and Google with their Google Plus and so on, and even LinkedIn. But Twitter's been a little slow to go, and now we're seeing just a little bit of a peek into how they're going to change here in the near future.
Yeah, and, I think it's kind of good to see them make some changes. It's got a strength in the 140 characters, and it's continuing to build and continuing to grow, but I think that in order to remain relevant, remain competitive in the sort of modern social networking world, they've got to shake things up a bit. They've got to look for opportunities to add features, and especially as they're looking to increase revenue, they've got to play around a little bit and see what's going to work, see what brands want, see what's going to help brands interact with users, because that's where the money is really. The Twitter's goal is to help us as brands interact with users, and we're sort of going to pay them for that privilege. And so the more they can do to help that interaction, the more money they're going to see flowing in. So, I think this is an exciting time, definitely, for brands that are active on Twitter and looking to get more active on Twitter. I think we're going to see a lot of big changes and exciting changes coming up.
Yeah, we've discussed it a little bit before, but out of all the social networks, especially kind of when it comes to being a companion network to a lot of things that are happening around the world in regards to news and sports and TV and other things of entertainment value, that Twitter is really kind of in a prime spot to take advantage of being the go-to destination for open discussions. And I think we'll talk about that a little bit as we go through the episode. So with that, we have usually our infographic of the episode. And in this case, it's actually a study from Pew, right?
Yeah, so the study, called simply Twitter Use 2012, or 2012, I guess, was looking at the way that users are interacting with Twitter, the demographics of Twitter, all the valuable information, really, that marketers are going to want to pay attention to and take into account when you're planning out some of these activities and you're thinking to yourself, is this my market? Are these the customers that I want to go after? And right off the bat, they start off with the broad usage statistics, which is that more than 20% of all U.S. people who use the internet also use or at least browse Twitter. So 20% of the people out there, if they're online, they're at least interacting with Twitter in some way, which is a pretty decent number. I mean, you think about it, 20%, that's 1 out of 5, and that's actually up. It doubled between November 2010 and February 2012. So, Twitter's not one of those networks that every day is putting out new numbers and saying, hey, look how big we are, look how big we are. But really, they're seeing very constant growth. And 20%, I think, is a very solid number. So for a while, brands were worried, is this just this small group and it's all these active Twitter users? It seems like now with 20%, that represents a significant part of the population. And of those users, actually 8% of all U.S. internet users are active on Twitter every day. So, 20%, that's your group that's potentially reachable, but 8% now are the people that are interacting with Twitter every day. Those are pretty heavy Twitter users. So I think those are solid numbers. What do you think, Adam?
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, if you double back to the fact that between the last, year and a half or a little over a year, that the number had doubled in the previous statistic that you provided. I mean, I think, with some of the stuff that we'll discuss here in the rest of the episode, you'll see kind of why and how Twitter is kind of taking that velocity and still leveraging it.
So a couple other statistics that are shared in the study, and we'll again link to this study in the show notes as we always do so that you can really read all the statistics. We're just going to pull out some of the more important ones, but 26% of 18 to 29-year-olds use Twitter, and this is the highest group in terms of the age of users that's on Twitter. So 26%. So Twitter does tend to be a little younger. The younger audience, the people that are sharing things online, they're more open with their sharing. Those are very active Twitter users, but there's a pretty good spread throughout the different age groups. 26% does actually represent twice the percentage of 30 to 49-year-olds. So 30 to 49-year-old users, that's a little less than 13% of online people are using Twitter. So there is a bit of a drop-off, but still, I think, very solid numbers across the board. There's a pretty even spread of household incomes. So yes, there is a larger population of lower household incomes due to the, higher number of 18 to 29-year-olds. They're just not making as much money. But at the same time, on the upper end of the scale, you've got plenty of people with a lot of household income that are going to have disposable income and the potential to, spend some of that income on your brand if you manage to make a good connection with them. And then looking at mobile use specifically, so 9% use Twitter on a cell phone. And this is, all Twitter users. So there is some mobile usage. This is probably... It surprised me a little. It seemed a little low. So I wonder if, the more active Twitter users are more likely to use it on their cell phone because they are more active. They're using it on the go. This might just be taking into account all Twitter users in general. But
and this is specifically smartphones too. They're talking about, right? This is not like they're trying to say on feature phones via text or something like that. They're talking about across all mobile phone usage, right?
I think so. I mean, you've got to imagine a large majority of that is smartphone. They didn't specify in their study. They just said cell phone. But Adam, you had actually dug up that Sysimo study, and they looked at the split of users, and this was pulled in March 11 of 2011. So the data's a little bit old, but I have to imagine it hasn't changed that much. And they're quoting 8.8% as using Twitter for iPhone, 5.5% Twitter for BlackBerry, 2.6% just using the mobile Twitter app, and then 2.3% Twitter for Android. So, those are smartphones.
Well, and not the mobile Twitter app, actually. The 2.6 is the mobile Twitter website, actually.
Yeah, that's correct. So m.twitter.com, they're kind of sparse, pared down website. So, spread out across various smartphone platforms. Some of that, buried in those numbers might be, I think they call them feature phones to be nice, but, the more plain phones. But yeah, I think smartphone usage is definitely strong, which, again, that's going to be a higher household income. That's going to be a more affluent customer. And for a lot of brands, that's the customer that they want to go after.
Yeah, I do agree that the 9% is a bit surprising to me, and I don't know, especially considering how young the audience skews. We can make some assumptions that it's kind of based off of the familiarity and affinity for using text messages that the younger audience have had. I mean, obviously, 18 to 29 is a kind of far cry from simply being a teenager per se. When you're still reaching up there at almost 30 years old, but 9% did seem a little bit low.
Yeah. So, anyways, setting the groundwork there, we've kind of laid down some numbers, and I think it's hard to deny the fact that Twitter is growing. The numbers are strong. It's got a good audience. That audience spreads out across age, across household income. It's almost exactly evenly split between the sexes. So, just a big audience. So I think what we wanted to do in this episode is really dive into some specifics around Twitter and talk about some of these changes, talk about things that we're noticing and how brands can potentially take advantage of those changes and, not get caught being lazy and thinking, oh, well, Twitter's the same that it was a year ago. And so the same things I was doing a year ago are going to work now. I don't need to change the way I interact. It's still just 140 characters when really there's a lot of new features, a lot of new ways that people are getting their Twitter information, a lot of new ways that they're interacting with Twitter, and even a lot of new ways Twitter is presenting that information. And again, we're talking about an overall shift in the way that brands put their brand out there in terms of more images and more content and more interactivity. So I think the first thing we were going to dive into is Twitter's first TV commercial, because what signals a growth of a network better than putting out a TV commercial, huh?
Especially, social media, going back to the old school.
There we go. Promoting social media through TV. What's more natural than that? But it was interesting. I think it's always interesting when a brand does their first TV commercial. When Google did it, people freaked out. They're like, oh, Google's doing a TV commercial. The world's going to explode. But really, TV is how you reach a mass audience. And so for me, I took this as, one, a signal that Twitter is, again, making big moves. This is Twitter saying, hey, we've got to where we've got on, word of mouth and having influencers and having strong usage inside of this online space, but how do we reach this, day-to-day, this kind of normal person, not the person that's on social media every single day, but the person that maybe dabbles a little bit and they'll check their Facebook and they'll, see what photos were posted by grandma and granddaddy on Flickr, but they're not these hardcore social media users. And the best way to reach that audience is with a TV commercial. And, that audience is pretty much the NASCAR audience, which is why Twitter's first TV commercial was about NASCAR, which seems like a great fit. That's a huge audience. It's an audience that wants to interact with that brand. So, we'll include a link to that TV spot. You can watch it. It's pretty short. It's basically just talking about the fact that they've rolled out this new feature, and the feature benefits brands like NASCAR. So what it is a hashtag page. It's actually a branded hashtag page, and that hashtag page aggregates all this conversation together. So you've got photos and you've got, specific accounts. They're able to say, hey, these are driver accounts. We want to feature these a little more prominently. And it's really bringing all of that conversation together. And I think that's interesting because it kind of signals a shift in the way that Twitter wants brands to engage. It's no longer, hey, go to my Twitter profile. They're saying, hey, prepare for, if you're big enough in the future, to just own a hashtag, and it makes it easier to aggregate that conversation. You're not having to say, hey, send me an @ reply and we'll have this back and forth. It's more saying, I can broadcast out and tune into this hashtag, and you'll see all of these things are about that brand or about that event or about that product. And I think that's really interesting because it's kind of focusing the conversation in a way, and it's focusing it around brands. So interesting move, and something that obviously they believe in because they're promoting it with a TV spot.
I think it's really quite significant, in fact, considering, we talked about this a while back, one of the first shows when I think it was the NFL that did the road to the Super Bowl, I think. Yep. Wasn't them that went ahead and had, essentially, they created a whole page that did almost the same thing. It said, here are some of the star players to follow. Here are some things that people are saying about these particular teams that are playing in the playoff games leading up to the Super Bowl. Discussions in general about the Super Bowl. And I think even a couple other brands might have done that. Maybe it was Ford or something like that as well, that we covered in a past episode. But the NFL did it kind of best, and really did it almost in a way as close as you might think to what Twitter is doing here with their hashtag. And I think the interesting thing about this is, and really the most impactful thing about this is, especially when you've got somebody, hashtags have always been, again, they were initially something that was invented by the Twitter community. And then eventually they kind of, were integrated into the to how Twitter functioned in regards to making them links and easy to find. Then, of course, search came, and we're talking, a few years ago in regards to where it was in the evolution of Twitter. And still, it's a little bit hard for people to really grok how to take advantage of hashtags if you're not one of those really savvy groups that we were discussing before that's on Twitter often. But there's a lot of value to add to somebody, whether or not they actually are using Twitter. I mean, we talked about there's a certain percentage of folks that are even just browsing Twitter. There's a lot of value to folks, again, whether you're using it or not, to coming and checking out this kind of convergence of content and discussion all in one place. And when you do, you start to suddenly almost instantaneously find out what the value of Twitter is, and it compels you to want to sign up. It compels you also to want to follow, you immediately get to see who of these drivers that you really love are actually on Twitter and what are they talking about. And you get to see the real time action of the photos. It actually has a huge potential for brands, especially the size of a NASCAR brand, and maybe eventually for some of the smaller brands as well, depending on how much content is generated from it. But I think it's pretty enormous in regards to helping brands establish more than just an account or 2 or 3 or 4. It helps bring that discussion to light and helps kind of that discovery process of content for those that are on Twitter. But it just really hits that point across about what the value of Twitter and the discussion is to those who might simply be interested in following content that they love and that they're passionate about.
Yeah, and I think, one of the easiest shifts for a brand to make is the old school way of saying, hey, we're on Twitter, was to say, hey, we're on Twitter, follow us at Twitter/brand name. Now what I think you can say is, hey, we're on Twitter, but don't focus just on our account. Communicate with us or talk about us using this hashtag. And the hashtag is going to become kind of that keyword that's the rallying cry now. So, you don't have to wait for Twitter to roll out a branded hashtag page for you. Just put that out there and say, hey, if you're talking about our product, or if you want to get in touch with us, this is the hashtag that we're now going to aggregate all these things together. And hey, if you've got a photo you want to share, use this hashtag. If you've got a story you want to share, use this hashtag. If you've got a link you want us to check out, this is the hashtag. Like, really drive home your branded hashtag and make sure that everybody's aware of it, everybody's using it, and that's going to bring together a lot of that conversation.
Wouldn't you say, Corey, that in a way, this is more inclusive of the overall community and people in general in regards to the conversation and the action of what's happening than, say, a Facebook page?
Potentially, yeah. I mean, I think, Facebook it's interesting. Facebook does a better job of segmenting specific conversations. So you can start a conversation, you can see everybody that's involved, you can kind of reply in line, but, it is bringing everything together, and I think that that's interesting. And that actually kind of leads into the next story that we were going to cover, which is the idea that Twitter is changing the way that even a profile looks for certain brands. So what they're doing is, for certain verified brands, they're actually turning off the ability to see replies when you first load up that brand's Twitter page. So all you're going to see from that brand are original tweets that they've written, and anything that they write that starts with an @ is going to be hidden. And this is something that, it's been done for user accounts for a long time now, where if you're logged into Twitter, the only way you see a conversation is if you know both parts of that conversation. So you have to know the person sending the tweet, you have to know the person receiving it, and then Twitter shows it to you. And now what they're doing is they're kind of taking that idea of hiding content and applying it to brands. So when you load up, say, twitter.com/NASCAR, you're not going to have to weed through all these conversations they're having and all these back and forths. You're just going to see the more broadcast-focused messaging. And I think that's interesting because, again, it's changing Twitter in a way. It's saying, hey, you can have these conversations and you can have that one-on-one interaction, but at the same time, we're going to help you put the spotlight on or draw attention to this original content that you're sharing and really, make that the star of the show.
Yeah, I at first I was a little skeptical of it and thinking, well, why would they do that a bit? And then realized that certain brands are going to be very, very, well, hopefully very, very active in engaging with folks, and whether it be engaging with them or whether it be in fielding customer service questions or whatever the case may be. And so some of the meat of what they are really putting out there and sharing with folks and so on ends up becoming kind of hidden with all those interactions, because hopefully what they're doing is that the percentage of engagement versus broadcasting is much more leaning on the side of engagement, and therefore the average person. I mean, I still personally, I would love to see how they're interacting with folks. That's my personal opinion. You still can, I believe, right? You can filter.
You can essentially kind of hit a switch, and that'll turn it over into the original mode where you can see everything.
It's kind of like when you do a search right now on Twitter, and there's a top versus all tweets. You just basically filter between those two. So I think it's interesting, an interesting kind of step in a direction that will help the content from those brands become more visible. And I'll be looking to see, for instance, how it might evolve in kind of the overall strategy that Twitter has for all the other things they have going on, because what we find in a lot of the social networks is these things that seem very, very small, because this is, somewhat of a minor thing for some people, might consider it somewhat minor. Then suddenly when it comes into the whole strategy and ecosystem and the other features that they release, it actually does play a pretty considerable part, because we talked about those hashtag landing pages, but Twitter has also started to help people over the last, year or so roll out slowly these branded kind of like landing pages or business pages for Twitter as well. And so they're just kind of piecemealing this for large brands first and kind of moving their way down.
Yeah. And part of that, kind of continuing this theme of shifting the focus from conversation to broadcast medium is the idea that they're expanding their expanded tweets, which is a terrible way of phrasing that. But basically, they've had this idea of expanded tweets, and they're broadening that to include a number of different channels, a number of different types of media. So what happens is when you go to a brand's Twitter page, let's say they link to a YouTube video. This has been around for a while. I'm sure a lot of people have seen this. You can click expand, or you can click, to view that video, and it'll just load it inside of Twitter. It doesn't send you out to YouTube. Well, they're going to take that same thing and actually apply it to a number of different brands and a number of different content types. So, for instance, the New York Times, they could write a story, and instead of just having a link and sending that to the New York Times, you'd click that link, and it would bring some of that story into Twitter. So it's going to bring, the first image from that story. It's going to bring some of the actual copy. So it's really allowing brands to share things and not just have it be, 140 characters in a link. It's allowing it to be a lot more engaging, and especially for things like images. And, we keep harping on this, but I think images are becoming increasingly important, and you're seeing it with things like this. People are going to be able to click on your tweet and see that image right on Twitter. They don't have to go elsewhere. They don't have to reload pages. It just all happens in that Twitter environment. And I think that's a very smart move. And again, it's signaling from Twitter that they want brands to share more media. They want them to share more video, more photos, more, there's even a polling application, and you can have that poll result expand inside of Twitter. They're really encouraging people not just to share text updates, but media as well.
Yeah, it was a year or more back where they essentially chose a certain number of partners. It was something around 5 or 6 or 7, something like that. And they made strong connections with them with Twitter and integrated them in. I think they wanted to be careful about the type of content that was shared, about how smooth the integration was, and so on. And, so YouTube, for instance, and Flickr and, Instagram, I think, came a little bit later, and some of the other video services out there like Vimeo as well. And so it seems that what they're doing is expanding upon that and finally saying, look, we've now really got this down, and we want to just get a lot more content in here. And so how do you think brands and businesses and so on and content creators and publishers might take advantage of something like this, Corey?
Well, again, I think it's really about, thinking about the types of content outside of just text you can share. What types of videos, what types of photos, what stories can you link to that are going to expand inside of Twitter? I think that's going to be the key to this. It's really sharing that content and ideally creating original content. It's one thing to link out and say, hey, look at this great thing that somebody else did. But if you can create something and put it out there, and maybe it's an infographic that you link to, now suddenly everybody that retweets that is not only retweeting a link, but they're actually retweeting that content. So that content becomes viral inside of this Twitter ecosystem. And I think that could potentially be really powerful. It'll be interesting to see how people respond. And I think there's still the question of, do third-party apps view this, or is it just on the website? Because, a lot of people aren't going to the Twitter website, but, still something to keep an eye on, if for no other reason than the fact that it's signaling from Twitter, hey, put a little more effort into your media, and we're going to help you get that out there.
You know, I'm a little pessimistic in this, in the sense that I agree with you that it is powerful. But I wonder how many folks, because, we talked a little bit earlier about the Sysmos data and how many people, for instance, use twitter.com. And we talked about, again, you mentioned it, how many of the third party apps and even the native apps actually show all of this content currently in the expanded view, just like it does on twitter.com. So I'd be really, really curious to see some information that shows how many people actually engage with those expanded tweets. Because I actually have a feeling that the average user doesn't really know that it's there. And potentially, I mean, I think when somebody ends up clicking on the content, then it will expand for them. But, whether they feel like clicking on that content initially to even initiate that action and for that tweet to open up and say, here you go, here's the content we're linking to, versus something that's not supported, just a link directly out to a site. I'm still a little, I guess I'd say I'm a little bearish on just how many folks are actually engaging with that content for the moment, for that to be a really significant place for people to concentrate on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, which I guess leads nicely into our next story, which is the idea.
I swear I'm not doing it on purpose.
Twitter is trying to become, just a communication method. They don't want to be like, oh, I do this over here, and then, sometimes I go to Twitter. Twitter wants to be like text message. They just want to be this platform that, you're creating content and you're getting it out there. And so what they've done is they've actually kind of upped their integration with Facebook. So you could always take your tweets and post those to Facebook, and, hey, it gets there, it gets the job done, but it wasn't exactly elegant. Well, what they've done is they've expanded that Facebook integration. They've made it much deeper. And so, like you mentioned, Adam, if you're creating this content and you're linking to things, you're including photos, well, how many people are actually going to see that on Twitter? But what you can do now is link that into Facebook. And especially as a brand, you could connect your Twitter page into your brand page on Facebook. And now, let's say you link to a story, it's actually going to pull in a photo from that story, a preview from that story, and it's all going to do it in this expanded form that fits in with the Facebook ecosystem. So suddenly that 140 characters of text on Twitter has become a photo and a link and a preview and all of this content on Facebook, and really, again, expanding the reach of that and making it something that as a user, you can interact with that brand, not just on Twitter, but now on Facebook. And brands can, focus on Twitter, sure, but then also have those efforts expand their Facebook presence as well, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, that was a bit more interesting to me when I saw that happening over the last week or so, and I think it's something that people should be aware of, that businesses and brands should be aware of. I don't know necessarily at the moment, unless people think creatively and experiment, as we always kind of put out there as a call to action for folks to always be experimenting, whether or not there's an actual actionable way of taking advantage of this beyond kind of appreciating the fact that now your content has more has longer legs to stand on and run on. I think you initially said it when you were starting to comment on this, that I often think of Twitter as like the freeway on-ramp when it wants to travel, when your content wants to travel from destination to destination or from person to person. And so you might publish some content on your site or on YouTube or wherever the case may be, but that content essentially hits this freeway, which is Twitter, where it suddenly is available to, tens of thousands and millions of different people, pending what sort of visibility it has. But it just kind of travels more quickly on Twitter in many ways than it does, say, on Facebook sometimes. And then ends up going back out and being reshared onto like a LinkedIn or a Facebook or something like that. And again, like you said, now being the fact that they are embedding this content in a better way, similar to what they do when you embed, like when you just put a link to a YouTube video in Facebook, or you put a link to a blog post in Facebook, it definitely adds more visibility. And I think even more interesting than just the content is the fact that it actually has a link directly to the user who's posting it, right?
Yep. Yeah, definitely. Bringing that audience back, and anytime it's getting retweeted, that's bringing that audience to a new place and expanding that. So I think that's a key to getting the word out there.
So let's see. What do we have going on next here?
So we got a lot in the hopper, but I think what we're going to do now is actually take a pause and feature a couple of the interviews that we had from the Social Loco conference. So as we mentioned in the last episode, we did a number of interviews, and we did so many, in fact, that we couldn't put them all in one episode. So what we're going to have in this episode is Diane Eisner, who works for Waze and is actually, deeply involved in building that community. So we had a chance to talk with her about building a mobile-focused product and some of the unique challenges with that and some of the things that they've done. What happens when you build a product that's designed to bring users together, and then there's only one user. What does that user see? How do you still make that product valuable to them? And then on a more aggregate level, just building a community and some of the tips for building a community as strong as Waze has done, and really a long-term community. Waze has been around for a number of years now, and we actually touched on that. And so we talked to her about some of the things that helped Waze to become this sustainable service and something that people were, engaged with and return to over and over again. And then we had a chance to talk with Kip Jones, and he's from Skyhook Wireless. So that's a technology company. They're doing a lot of interesting things with location data. They worked with Apple early on, and so what they're actually focusing on now is internal location. So being able to give your phone location data inside of a building, and obviously, huge implications for that. Suddenly, you could be offering coupons dedicated to specific aisles inside of a grocery store. You can have check-ins that work in multi-story buildings. There's a lot of opportunity for internal locations. So
I can finally find that cereal that I've been looking for like the last 15 minutes in the supermarket.
Exactly. So, a lot of implications there. And then we also got a chance to talk with him about data security because, of course, with location data, people are very cautious about that. Where is it getting shared to? Where is, who has access to that? So we did talk to him about data security as well. So we hope you enjoy those, and we will return with a little more Twitter news after this interview break. All right, so we're here with Diane Eisner, VP of Partnerships and Platform at Waze. Is that correct?
It's correct.
All right, I got it first try. Very nice.
Yeah, there you go.
So I think, we're familiar with Waze. Maybe you could just give a little brief description of what Waze is.
Waze is social GPS and real-time traffic application that's free for iPhone and Android, and basically crowdsources everybody's drives to help route people around traffic and avoid congestion.
Sure. So I think, in my words, in internet years, Waze has been around for quite a while, which I think is great. And, we see a lot of companies sort of, if they don't sell in 6 months, they don't call it a success. But you guys have really done well with building a community. What has been that driving force that's helped build that community and help get people to support Waze as a platform?
Well, I think it's a few things. One is starting with the team. We're very, very focused on execution. I think we have not been a hip or cool company. We've been really just heads down, focused on the execution, and no matter what has happened competitively or what technology has changed, we're really just trying to focus on making something that's fantastic for every single one of our users. And so definitely that level of focus is great. In terms of the service itself, we've tried to build something that over time evolves, right? So it's not like you can say, well, today we have 20 million drivers. And so there's really good traffic information. When you're user number one, you saw a blank white map, and that was it. So we architected the experience to be about making the building process enjoyable. It was very literally the builder truck, the construction feel of the app. And so you knew that as the first few thousand people, you were building towards something that would eventually be this, but it was fun in the meantime.
Yeah.
And then when you would see another Wazer once in a while, we had a road grid, then it was about trying to create something that was really fun to get people over that hump till we got to the functional. And that was, eating a snowflake and getting 5 points for it. But knowing at the same time that every time you ate one of those road goodies, we were getting real-time fresh information from that location.
Yeah.
And then now we're at the point where we really can route you around traffic and really can save you 5 to 10 minutes a day. And if we can't, we'll at least tell you why. Why you're stuck in traffic. Because the community is so helpful and so good at participating, and they want to contribute. They feel like they're actually helping one another out, and I think that has been really the key. How we are able to try to give people a reward, a benefit for participating, even when you were the first person.
You deal with partnerships, and I've seen you guys used a lot on like the local news, for instance. We're here in the Bay Area, and I think it's NBC, for instance, promotes you guys pretty openly. ABC promotes you guys very openly. What makes, for instance, a network like that turn around and want to adopt something that might be considered competition to their talent that they have? I mean, how did you make that partnership happen?
Well, the original partnership was a funny story. Have you heard of Carmageddon?
Yeah.
Okay, so Carmageddon was a 10-mile stretch of the 405 in LA that was totally shut down for a weekend. Normally carries 500,000 vehicles. And there's no way to track every real-time route. The traditional traffic systems rely on road sensors that are on the major highways, sometimes the major arterials, but that's it. So you're not getting information about all those side routes. So during that moment, it was imperative that people at least look at crowdsourcing. So the mayor came out in support of Waze. ABC7 there reached out and asked us to come into their studio, and they really challenged us to ensure that our data was of high quality. If there was a report on the map, they sent out a helicopter to go see if it was really there, and they were like, there really is a sofa on the middle of the street over there. So what happened was, after that weekend, when Carmageddon was over, the traffic reporter wanted to continue to use Waze because she felt like it was a way to engage her audience, that she was getting information on the side street she didn't get before, and now we're on 11 stations. So it's a way to complement what they're already doing and to let them have a bit more fun. Yeah. And audience engagement is a big hot button issue for the broadcasters now, and so if we have a way to engage their audience, like joining the group, allowing them to give rewards, showing them on TV, then it's kind of a win-win for everybody.
How do you think other companies and brands that want to do something that involves crowdsourcing, how do you think that they should approach it? Meaning, it's definitely a different model than, say, going out and buying data or creating that data from some source of technology you have or your own, force of folks. But to go out there and now to create a model that that's built on top of a community of users, just like you said, one of the first hurdles was if you're user number one, you're looking at a big blank canvas and there is no data there. But it sounds like you guys have kind of, in a way, spoon-fed through gamification and motivation and so on, those first initial users to keep them going enough so that the community would grow. How do you think others who might want to take that approach might approach it?
I would say that there's so much data that you could be crowdsourcing that it's important to focus on what you want to crowdsource. Like, for example, we own our own maps. We crowdsource the actual map itself, and we supplemented it with some free government sources as well that were static, and then through people driving, we could turn it into a navigable map. That was a really important strategic decision for us because we didn't want to have to rely. I mean, for example, you saw that Google started charging for its Maps API. We didn't want to have to be at the whim of anyone else. That, and technically, if we could control that whole stack, then we can make sure if there's traffic, we can actually route you around it. It's all kind of seamlessly talking to one another. That was important. Local search, on the other hand, was not important for us in our minds to go and own. So we bring in Foursquare, we bring in Yelp. So I think focusing, in addition to being very cognizant of what it feels like to be a user on your platform at each point in time, are two things that I would focus on.
So businesses then that want to promote themselves or be available on the Waze platform, should they look to Foursquare and Yelp and optimize that data, or is there a way to actually work directly with you guys to promote their own business?
Yeah, it depends what it is. So for example, we're now, through our new category search, looking at different providers in various categories. There are shopping categories, there are couponing categories, there are fuel categories, there are parking categories. So I would say that we're pretty much set. We don't need any other Starbucks finders, but that if you think you have a product that would be really handy for people who are driving around on the road, we would love to hear about it because, again, we're always trying to optimize for what's good for our users. But it has to be around the experience of driving.
Sure.
We're very good at saying no, which was hard for the first few years, and now
getting much easier. There you go. So as a mobile-focused application, what has been some of the challenges in terms of getting the word out there about the application, and how have you guys approached distribution and making sure that new customers become aware of Waze?
Well, one of the other unique things about the company is that we feel like product is far more important than any separate than product marketing we could do. And so we've tried to keep it really much more about the product and improving the product
versus the brand in general.
Versus the brand in general. I mean, we care about those things and we obviously pay attention to it, but historically we've been very focused on just optimizing the product around what people want, about trying to address their concerns. And so originally we were featured by Apple and Android, which really, I mean, that does a lot for your numbers, particularly when you're small.
Those are your primary platforms, right?
Yeah. The press has been amazing, and so we just kept informing them of what we were up to several weeks in advance of a launch where we could. Now, obviously, the broadcasters are amazing for distribution, but we're looking much more at distribution partners as opposed to real marketing channels. And we try stuff out. And as our numbers change, each thing we do has less of an impact, right? So we're definitely thinking through what's next. But we just hired a PR agency for the first time. And they're incredible. We were just on the Today Show twice, just before Memorial Day. And those are numbers that, wow, that's incredible.
So PR can work sometimes for a mobile app if it's done correctly.
But there's a simmering that has to happen as well. I think that there's no plan, right? Like first you do this, then you do that, then you do this. There's no like magic formula in that context of the plan. But simmering, watching, responding. I remember one time we were excited about the system, but certain things were breaking. People didn't understand certain things, and it was so hard. But we said, all right, for 3 months, we're not going to talk to anyone, we're not going to release anything, and we spent time with our users for 3 months at a critical stage. It was right after our Series A, and it was hard not to do that. Hard to, your friends are thinking, what happened to Waze? They're not doing anything. Like, yeah, there we are. But you have to, taking the time to respond to that is how we figured out what was going to be the next step and make sure that we had a product, because it's pointless to put marketing money or even efforts behind something that people are not responding to and don't want to share.
I think lesson learned with that is that, especially if you're going to put an app out there, don't assume that, don't put all your eggs in the basket of producing the app alone. Consider the time it's going to take, like you said, to kind of simmer out there and to pay attention to where the right places of distributing that application, kind of the discoverability, like, well, shoot, it's on TV, it's on the news, and the news is where people go to rely on traffic-based information, and suddenly now they've got Waze kind of, nicely positioned next to that, and they're discovering it in that way. Versus, I think there's a lot of folks that put a lot of time and energy behind applications to think that it'll just be popped into the App Store and very little be done beyond that.
And I think if you're a game, and particularly a paid game, that's an okay model because you're just churning out the new ones. Unfortunately, we didn't have that. That's not our space, right?
You couldn't have gone with Zynga
Traffic
model,
is a little less sexy than Farmville,
Cool. Well, so I guess the last question I have for you then is, what does the future look like for Waze? How do you guys, continue to grow the platform, and what do you see coming up in terms of, opportunities?
So we've been focused on saving people time. And now that we have this very large community, we think that we have found a way to help also save them money. So that's going to be next in terms of the immediate term. We'll announce it on Wednesday. And then looking at the further out picture, I talked in my presentation about this idea of surplus, collective surplus, and paying attention to, okay, if we really save you 5 minutes a day, that's 60 hours a year or whatever, 10 cents a gallon becomes $108 a year. But then at the 20 million scale, this is billions of dollars, 2.2 billion, I guess, lots and lots of CO2 not put into the environment. And how do you plan for all of this potential surplus and make sure that we can do something good with it? And very excited, obviously, about smart cities, integrating our data with car data, with city data, to have the ultimate seamless experience of navigating through your city.
It's really amazing how mobile alone, once you put something on the side of somebody's pocket and have them explicitly say, it's okay to know this about me, my location, or where who I happen to be based on social information. All those little things eventually start to open up such a kind of a new world, as you were saying.
Yeah. Well, hey, a startup that's going to save the country tens of millions of dollars sounds like a good idea to me. So, thanks for stopping by.
Thank you very much.
Sharing information with us.
Thanks,
Appreciate you.
All right.
So we're here talking with Kit Jones, And you are the chief architect of Skyhook Wireless, right?
And privacy czar.
And privacy czar. Perfect. We'll have a bunch of privacy questions for you as well. And for those that aren't familiar with Skyhook, can you describe what you guys do?
Sure. So we are a location infrastructure provider. We provide location capabilities for mobile devices around the world. So from Apple to Dell to Sony to Samsung, all of the location capabilities on the platform to pinpoint the device, as well as do location intelligence based on that ambient picture of activity around the world.
And in most cases, people think of location as GPS, the average consumer, especially when it comes to their mobile device. But before, for instance, you mentioned Apple as one of your customers. Before the iPhone had GPS inside, it was actually very kind of publicly using Skyhook to help power its location base off of what technologies?
So we started out as wireless positioning, Wi-Fi positioning in particular, and so that at the time, 8 years ago when we started, it was sort of crazy idea, and people looked at us like, well, there's GPS, but GPS has issues, and now I think everybody has kind of come to realize that there are places where it doesn't work as well as you'd like, and there are other technologies that can fill gaps. So we've grown and now use cell and Wi-Fi and whatever signals are available. But I think, and you'll see that proliferate the different technologies used for location in the future.
Nice. So it seems like with location, one of the great things is a lot of this data. And you mentioned ambient data. How can companies start to make use of that data and take advantage of that, or is it something that just the bigger companies are able to leverage?
Well, there's a couple things. I think for the owners, I think that getting your place of interest accessible, so that people that do use ambient recognize they're in your store, your venue, your location. And so using those different technologies out there to be able to provide that information is an important component. And then being able to have people send you that information back to you, like what were you doing in my venue, what were you interested in, did you get that? Once they're in there, you can interact with them and then provide that context.
Okay. Where do you see the industry evolving in the next couple of years as it comes to location data and accessing that data?
Well, I think that from a location capability standpoint, the infrastructure, which is less interesting, I think, to most people, that's another subject. But I think from access to people's information, I think we see a trend towards managing location as opposed to it just being thrown out there willy-nilly. So I think people are getting to the point where, okay, I understand my location is important. It's important to me. Let's come up with a deal by which I can share that with you. You get value and I get value. And I think that's a social contract that is coming.
So as privacy czar, you must have to deal with a lot of consumer, feelings and uneasiness towards the way that their data is being used. So what do companies need to be aware of as it relates to that, and how do they need to approach data in terms of how they're using it and how they're communicating with customers?
Well, I think the important thing is, my sort of mantra is, do what you say and say what you do. So always let them know what you're going to do with it, when you're going to use it, and how you're going to use it, and don't go away from that without telling them. So don't surprise, other people have said, don't surprise your customer. I think surprise is the worst thing.
It sounds like we've had past discussions with folks who have talked about, is privacy dead, and what's the definition of privacy, and I remember the discussion kind of blossomed around a few folks saying privacy is having a clear understanding of what somebody's going to do with the information that you provide them, and then that expectation is being met. And as soon as you break that expectation, you've broken their trust, and therefore everything just all goes to heck. So it sounds like you're kind of echoing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a tough one because location in particular is very sensitive. Right? I mean, if you have my track of where I've been for a number of days, you've got a lot of information about me, even if you don't have my name. And so that one, I have a hugely powerful. I mean, it can provide such insight into things. but it also requires that level of care from people that get it.
How could brands take advantage of this data, whether it be now or in the future?
Well, I think what you see is you can get trends, right? So both from a competitive analysis as well as out-store, in-store analysis, how people are behaving, how their behavior is different based on an activity that you initiated, whether it's an advertising, marketing campaign, whether it's signage. And I think, today it's a lot harder to get indoor detail. The next couple of years, we'll see indoor positioning and mapping become more prevalent and accessible to more broad scale venues.
All right. Well, Kip, that's a lot of great information. We appreciate you sharing with us.
Good.
Thanks for joining us on the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right. All right, Adam. So back to Twitter. A couple more stories, and again, just a lot happening. A lot of changes, and nothing huge, no drastic overhauls. We're not saying, all right, now you can have 500 characters, go crazy, but a lot of subtle things. And I think, we're noticing shifts and we're noticing trends. And when you think about all of these together and the way that Twitter is positioning the network and the way that they're, tailoring it and they're trying to, help brands reach new audience and they're trying to help users make the most of Twitter and be able to pull out that really valuable information, I think it's really interesting. And so, one of the, I would say, bigger changes that they're making is tailoring things like user suggestions on a user-by-user level. So back in the day, Twitter had this suggested user list. It was really the way to go from zero to hero overnight. They put people on this thing and suddenly users had, hundreds of thousands or even millions of users. And I think they actually turned that off because people were like, what the heck? My brand didn't get on suggested user list. My competitor did. Suddenly he's got 1 million followers and didn't have to do anything. That seems a little unfair. And by that point, Twitter was big enough. But what they're doing now is they're actually coming back and revisiting that idea because it really is a powerful idea. I think suggesting accounts for people to follow helps both, build the stickiness of Twitter. Users are more likely to return and they're more likely to, be one of those daily visitors, but it also helps brands and other accounts find a new audience and specifically find an audience that's relevant. So it's not just saying, hey, this is this giant account that millions of people are following. You probably want to too. They're saying, hey, this is, an account that's really popular locally or an account that talks a lot about the things that you talk about as well. And they're finding those tailored suggestions and really recommending them on a user-by-user basis. And I think this is really interesting because, again, it kind of signals a shift towards Twitter aiming to do some of the work for you. What was your take on this story, Adam? Do you think this is going to help brands to find that relevant audience?
Again, I think it's more of a passive step, right? So there's a lot of these passive steps where it's almost akin to what you would call, you have to be connected with a brand first for Facebook's edge rank to kick in and for the content that you care about to show up. And so this in a way is not necessarily taking that step because you have not yet connected with folks at this point, but anything that's going to make you feel better about the people you connect with because you're not like, why am I following this person? Why are you suggesting this to me? They may have list after list after list shown to them, and with all the thousands and millions of users that are there, they could be missing the mark every single time, and therefore there's never this kind of there's never a positive discovery process for the average user because of that. And so now that they're really pushing the relevancy issue with this, and they're really taking a look at the interaction that each individual user has on a like you said, just person by person basis, it helps improve the overall Twitter experience instead of them saying, well, there's nothing here for me. I don't really like it. This really leads back into also the fact that they are also starting to experiment with this when it comes to trends. So they're tailoring who you should follow and who they suggest that you should follow, and then they're starting to also tailor the trending topics that you have based on your location and based on who you are and the type of people you follow and so on as well. And so this push towards relevancy is, again, more of a passive push. It's something that most people are not going to be probably not only immediately aware of, but even really aware of over the long run. It's just going to feel like the quality in general is being pushed up a number of notches, and folks will kind of get provided content that they feel better about on an individual basis. And that's kind of the power of a social network with as much data and interaction as it's having. There's been some discussion as well about the fact that, based on the places that you visit and frequent online and the places you've clicked to tweet, when you click a tweet button, that Twitter's going to be able to actually recommend content to you and feed some more data based on that. Now, you've heard the discussion a little bit about the filter bubble regarding when there's an algorithm that starts to feed specific content to you or users to you or trends to you. Have you heard of that term before?
Yeah, so that's the idea that, when filters like Facebook's edge ranking or what Twitter's doing here with tailoring the feeds, that it starts to only feed you things that, you are really passionate about, but at the same time, you're missing out on all these things that maybe you weren't looking for, or you didn't even know that had you seen it, you would have liked it, but it just never gets presented to you. So it's kind of filtered out. Is that the idea? Yeah.
And so in some cases, it's not great. Like when we talk about, say, the Google Plus Your World integration into search, we've talked about that. It's a little sketchy. But when we talk about Twitter, I think the takeaway for that is to say, just because now more relevant content and more relevant users and more relevant content via the tailored trends is being delivered into the hands of people who are likely, hopefully, the more appropriate audience, doesn't mean that you are going to be discovered more. It's going to help some brands. It's going to help a lot of brands. But then that also means that you're still going to need to engage with folks and do some things creatively in order to get discovered beyond that. It doesn't necessarily even put you at a disadvantage per se if you're a relevant brand for those sorts of people. But I would hasten to have anybody kind of, kick their feet up and relax and think that somehow their content is just suddenly going to take off because of this. I think it's a subtle push. It's going to be better for the user. It is going to be better for the brands. But to just kind of pay attention to it and see how much effort in regards to how much return that you're getting when it comes to engaging and putting out content with folks. And like you said, are more people of relevant, more relevant people starting to follow your brand now because of these personalizations and tailored recommendations. I think that in the end, these are still being somewhat rolled out, so they're not officially out there and available to everybody just yet. But they're kind of testing it and playing with it like they are with some of the other things we discussed. And so I would imagine that over the next, say, 6 months or so, hopefully we'll start to see it become a regular part of how Twitter operates.
Yeah, and the other nice thing for brands especially is that you no longer have to chase after these giant trends. So a lot of brands, the go-to advice was, just tweet about whatever the trending topic was. Well, a lot of times those trending topics are really weird and not related to your brand. And so you're out there trying to, integrate the hashtag like, what cat are you? And you're like this, local gardening company, and you're using these hashtags that really make no sense. And you're like, why am I doing this? I guess I'm growing the audience. So, what Twitter's saying is, hey, stop doing that. Just talk about the things that are relevant to you, and then we'll try to do our best to bring a relevant audience. And, if you talk a lot about gardening, we'll find other people that like gardening, and we'll bring those to you, and we'll show those users to your account and say, hey, look, this is a brand that's putting out a lot of great content. You're going to like them. They're going to like you. They're sort of being the matchmaker here. And I think that that's a really, great thing for them to do. And I think it's going to ease the burden for a lot of brands where they were trying to chase after these giant memes that weren't a fit. And it's going to allow them to focus their content a lot more.
So they're also allowing people to do a little bit more flaunting and touting of some of their metrics on their profiles, right?
Yeah, so they used to cap retweets at 50, which was, kind of weird. They just
what they 50. Would display, right?
Yeah, exactly. It would display 50 plus regardless of how many retweets it got. So, President Obama would say something and it just got thousands and thousands of retweets, but it just said 50 plus. And so what they've done, I guess it was like a technical limitation or, something, but they've removed that. And so now they're giving actual counts that are essentially unlimited. If you have 62,500 retweets, it'll say 62,500. And so I think what's interesting about this, and it's kind of a quick little hit, but the idea is that, one, you can see what tweets are popular and how popular they really are. So you can look around and say, hey, this seems to be gaining a lot of momentum. Is it as popular as I think? And it's kind of a gut check in that sense. And two, it's great for gathering data on your competition. So you can go out and say, okay, well, here's the 3 or 4 brands in my area. Here's what they're talking about. When they get retweets, how many retweets are they getting? How popular is this content? And it's allowing you to say, okay, in my group of brands, my competition, what's getting a great response from the audience? And then, you can kind of use that to your advantage. You can start writing tweets about that type of content and know that there's an audience out there for that if the content is right.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent way of using something that otherwise might seem a little, self-grandizing and simple. It's definitely something that could be used as a research tool.
All right, so last thing on the Twitter news that I wanted to cover, because we've talked a lot about, very technical things, kind of very Twitter-specific things. So I figured we'd talk about something fun as well. And that was actually a program put on, I think it was South Africa, I want to say. It was Cape Town. Which is interesting, seeing something, this innovative come from, an area that we don't usually think of. We think of like, oh, well, of course, like Silicon Valley is going to do something crazy like this. But no, this was Cape Town, South Africa. It was put together by design company Thanksgiving and ad agency Draft SCB. And it was for the Toyota Etios, I guess it's pronounced, Etios, which is a car I guess we just don't have in the States here. But, what it was is a storefront installation, and it was this whole Rube Goldberg machine, bells and slides and ramps and spinny things, and it would play a song, and there were birds in there. But the goal for this was to actually interact with people on the street. So if you're walking by, you'd see this thing in the storefront, and it would say, hey, send a tweet with this hashtag, and you'll get a little reward. So you'd send a tweet, you'd include the hashtag, and then suddenly this machine would fire to life, and a little gumball would come, tromping down the trail, and at the end of it would shoot out into a little holder, and you basically got a free gumball in exchange for tweeting using this specific branded hashtag. So I thought it was a really interesting example of, kind of, again, rewarding people for engaging with your brand. It's doing something in the offline world that has an online component, which is interesting. It's fun just to watch this Rube Goldberg machine kind of do its thing and get crazy. And it seems like something that could be really easily duplicated for brands on a smaller scale as well, right?
Yeah. It's not like it takes millions of dollars to do something like this. And especially if you have a storefront display, it's a pretty awesome idea in order to kind of get people to interact with you and maybe, of course, spread this hashtag around if you've got some specific hashtag you want to have shared. We covered something like this in the past when there was, I think, an agency or something, or maybe it was a company that wanted their customer service department to kind of get a little treat that rolled out every single time there was a positive tweet or something like that from a customer regarding their product or service.
Yeah, so that was it was actually both an agency and a company. I believe it was Mint Digital, and they create products, and they're also an agency for clients. So they created this product called the Poly, and we had to actually go all the way back to episode 5 is when we discussed that. But Poly was basically this thing you'd
How do you remember that? How do you remember that?
Well, I had to look it up today, so I did a little research. But I cheated.
You could have just been like, dude, I remember every single episode. Just tell me to guess which. Just tell me a topic, and I'll tell you the timestamp in the audio.
I didn't want to set up false expectations that I could do that. I cannot at all, but I looked it up. So Poly was this thing. You plugged it into a USB drive or a USB port, and you told it what hashtag to pay attention to. Or actually, I think it paid attention to retweets as well. You basically set these markers, and when that marker was met, it would spit out a little gumball. And so, the idea when we talked about it originally is, hey, it's a great way to reward your internal staff. So you've got all these people, you're saying, hey, we want to, increase conversation. We're trying to get retweets going. every time we get 10 retweets, somebody gets a candy. It's a great way of rewarding internal staff. But seeing this, this Rube Goldberg outdoor installation got me thinking that that same idea could be applied to interacting with customers. So, let me paint a little picture here. Imagine you're a restaurant and you've got that place where people kind of pay their bill, and there's that time they've brought their little receipt up, and they say, okay, well, it's $67.95, and you're running a credit card machine. You could have this little poly machine right there with a little sign that says, hey, tweet hashtag whatever the restaurant name is, hashtag Mark's Diner, and get a gumball. And so they're like, okay, well, I'll try that out. Just had a great meal at hashtag Mark's Diner, and they send that, and then 10 seconds later they hear a little whirring rumble sound and a little gumball pops out. I think it's a neat way of just providing a little added bonus, a little nicety that's saying, hey, we like having fun, we're giving you something, we're saying thanks for tweeting, and then you can follow up later and maybe just say, hey, thanks for stopping by the restaurant, and we hope you liked getting a gumball at the end or something like that. But I think just thinking of those little ways of connecting the online and offline world can go a long way towards putting a little surprise and delight in somebody's day-to-day.
Yeah, actually, that's a pretty awesome idea, and now it's making me want to go out and buy one of those little poly things. Just think about how many times when you're paying the bill do you walk up and grab either like a toothpick or a mint or something like that at the end, and could you imagine the sort of reaction you might have in kind of incentivizing folks to tweet? And initially when you said, and when you tweet, you hear the whir and the rumble, and I just was thinking of the beginning of the first Indiana Jones when that big boulder came rolling down. So, but that would be pretty awesome. They'd be like, if you tweet the wrong thing, you'll get a different sort of boulder coming down. But that's a really excellent idea. And again, I think I'm going to check out to see if I could find one of those poly things. I don't remember if they were selling them or not. But that would be pretty cool thing to experiment with. So we've gone through all the Twitter stuff. We usually talk about a tool a week or tool an episode. And you had a Twitter app that you're using on your Mac that I've never even heard of before, which has a really interesting name. And so we want to talk about that for a moment here before we kind of jump into the lightning round at the tail end of the episode. So what's the name of this application?
So the application is called Habari, and it really isn't well known, but how I discovered it is it was the first application that met a very specific need that I had, and I had actually put this out there. I wrote tweets about it. I think I had a blog post asking, please, somebody develop this application. And so finally, when I saw this app, I was like, oh, literally angels sang, and I was like, this is the app that's going to do what I want it to do. And what I called it was original content mode. And so I wanted an app that stripped out all the crap that's out there in Twitter that really distracts from the original things that people write. So, yes, there's a time and a place for going in and getting the full Twitter feed, and you want to see conversations, and you want to see retweets, and you want to see links and all these things. But I wanted a time or a way to just find the original content that people were saying. Not links, not photos, not all that stuff. I just wanted to see, original kind of thoughts they were having and putting out there into the world. So I called it original content mode. And how Habari goes about that is it actually kind of functions as a secondary Twitter app. So it's not designed to be your main Twitter app. But what it does is it uses filters, so you can actually pull out certain types of content. So I've used a filter to eliminate things like @, hashtag, bit.ly to take out links, whatever the short link for Facebook is. You just feed it all these things that you want it to remove from your feed. And then you can just leave this thing running, and all it's going to do is source content that doesn't match those filters. So the filters pull out all the things you don't want to see, and what you're left with is just content that you want to see. And so, for me, I follow a pretty sizable number of accounts. And so if you're just looking at the raw feed, it can sometimes be overwhelming. But with this, it really pares it down into, for me, very interesting and relevant content. And it opens up a lot of opportunities for discussion, because you're not looking at replies, which is somebody else's discussion. You're not looking at links, which are sort of passively shared on Twitter. you're just looking at things that somebody said, hey, I've got a thought, here it is, it's out there in the world, and you can often reply to that and engage people in conversation because they've put this thought out there and, they're likely looking for a response. So how I use it, I leave it open, I have it in the background, and it updates. I don't even think you can have it update live. You can only have it update like once a minute, which is kind of ideal. The whole idea here is not to get overwhelmed with Twitter. It's something that, it updates, you check it, and you kind of move on with your day. It's got a minimalist design. That's a feature. They talk about that on the site. It cuts down on clutter. There's no animations. There's no buttons. There's no timestamps. It doesn't even have a read status. It doesn't tell you like these have been read, these haven't. The whole idea is it's a passive app that's designed to let you, engage with Twitter on your own terms. I love this app. I'm a huge proponent of it. I try to share this with as many people as possible. Now I'm sharing it with the podcast. I hope that everybody out there gets a chance to check it out. It actually has a free 14-day trial if you want to give it a shot. It's Hibari app, HIBARIAPP.com, HibariApp.com. You can download it. You can give it a free 14-day trial. And then if you like it, it's $10 in the Mac store. So it is a premium product. You're going to have to pay for it. But, it's the only thing out there like it that I've found. It's the only application that lets you use all of these filters to really just get at the content you want. So if you're out there, having the same thought that I had of how do I cut down on some of this clutter, check out Hibari app. It might be, the best way you've found to engage in conversation and find relevant content that you want to interact with.
If that is not an endorsement, I don't know what is.
There we go. We got to call them now and see if they'll sponsor the show, right? We'll just replay that section every episode.
Hibari, I've never used you, but I love you too. All right, so now we have we got the timer preparation here for the lightning round. I do. Let me fire that up. You looking around for the phone?
I gotta get it ready. Hopefully the battery's going to survive.
So for those that aren't familiar with what we're doing here, we like to close the show. We try really, really hard as we've massaged the format here to try to keep the show concise and compact. And usually we were covering tons and tons of topics. And instead we decided to be a little bit more focused throughout the body of the show and then give ourselves essentially 1 minute each. One to describe a particular topic or story that's out there that we find interesting, and then the other person to go ahead and spend 60 seconds to respond back to them, and we time it so that way we shut our mouths when the time is done and we move on to the next story before finishing up the podcast. So we call that the Solomo Lightning Round, and with that, I'm going to let Corey go ahead and describe our first Lightning Round story.
All right, so we got 1 minute on the clock here. I will fire it off and start the story. Ready? Go. So the first story, this was a huge kind of hot button issue for the last couple days. It was Oreo putting out an image for Pride Day, which was Monday, June 25th. And they just took an Oreo and basically photoshopped a bunch of different icing layers in it, and it made a rainbow Oreo. And all it was is this rainbow Oreo. It said June 25th, Pride. And they said, proudly support love. Not a, hugely controversial issue, but it just ignited this firestorm. People were crazy about this thing. There was huge supporters, huge detractors. Right now it has over 200,000 likes, 60,000 shares, 31,000 comments. This was just this viral image. It literally ignited an entire firestorm of debate. And I think it's interesting, they took a stand on a controversial issue, and yes, they pissed off some people, but at the same time, the people that are in support of that are going to become bigger fans of Oreo. So you're losing some, but you're gaining a lot more on the other end. I thought that was an interesting play. Right on the 60-second mark. All right, Adam, your take on the Oreo story. Ready, go.
I think it's a really... It's a really powerful example of how just even one image can create a discussion, if you look at just on Facebook alone, when we share the link and you see the amount of discussion that's happening and people, for instance, that have actually tagged themselves in the image in order to share it and allow it to go viral, it's pretty amazing to see. And it shows that the power of producing one image, if kind of thoughtfully done and having the right timing based on things that might be going on around you in current events, politics, world news and such, can really have quite an impact. Regardless of whether it does positive or negative things for the brand, we'll see. But it does show the power of a powerful, of even a simple image.
All right. With 8 seconds to go, you got a little bit of bonus time. Very nicely done.
Awesome.
All right, so next up, I will start the timer and hit story number 2. Ready, go. So this is actually a blog post that I wrote, so I'm kind of proud of this one, but it was for the Call Me Maybe meme, and this was a bunch of people doing lip dubs of this Call Me Maybe song. You may have heard it on the radio. It's a pretty popular pop hit right now, but what I thought was most interesting is that it wasn't always a pretty popular pop hit. It wasn't something that came out of the gate and suddenly everybody was talking about it. It actually grew over time. So this was a great example of what an actual viral piece of content looks like. It came out in November, and it's just now hitting #1 on the Billboard charts, and it did so by embracing this YouTube culture. So Justin Bieber made a version of it. The Miami Dolphins cheerleaders made a version of it, and even they made a version for the female audience as well that had a bunch of like muscly, shirtless guys running around. And it seemed like something that, grew organically. It was very interesting. And I think Miami Dolphins cheerleaders were smart to jump on that. And as a brand, embrace that and say, hey, we can have a little fun too and get involved in this meme. And that's my 60 seconds. All right, Adam, what is your take on Call Me Maybe? Ready, go.
I don't think I've ever heard the song as well, beyond when I first heard this, besides hearing it on your iPod, Corey. And, I had seen a few other folks doing the lip dubs out there, and, I read your article and didn't realize just how much it had caught on, but it just kind of it's a new type of discovery, right? Somebody thinks it's really interesting. They think it's fun. They go ahead and they take ownership over it. And then somebody takes the idea and runs with it. So it's not the first time that it's happened, and it's happened in a lot of different forms, but it really, for whatever reason, music ends up, being a place that people latch onto a lot in regards to this. So we've seen brands actually, again, Miami Dolphins cheerleaders, it really is associated with the brand, take a hold of something like this, and propel it out into a broader audience. And so, take a look at it. Maybe there's some fun stuff you guys can do with a pop song or here or there and put it on YouTube.
Right.
I feel so much pressure. I feel so much pressure when I see that timer going down. I'm like, I got to close this.
I know. That's the fun of the lightning round. That's what makes it exciting. All right, well, let's close it out with the last story here. So ready, go. This was Square adding rewards to their payment application. So we actually talked about this in a previous episode with what Level Up was doing. So Level Up, the first time you use it at a number of locations, it's actually paying you to do so. So Square now has the ability to, 1, motivate people to go to your store by offering them a discount for first-time users, and 2, offer frequent customers a reward. So you're basically getting a punch card. You can do things like, hey, come, 5 burgers and the 6th burger is on us. And I actually had a experience with Level Up doing the same thing today. I was walking down the street looking for a place to go to lunch, and I saw this sign on the street, and it said, come have a burger on us using Level Up. So I walk in and I was like, what's the deal? And they said, oh, just use Level Up and you'll get $10 off. So I did. I spent like $1 extra to get a side of fries, and I got a free lunch on Level Up. And I never would have gone to that burger place had it not been for Level Up. So I think Square doing this, huge opportunity for brand. Definitely check this out. And look at how you can both reward new users and also returning customers as well using this application. All right, Adam, 60 seconds to respond to Square adding rewards. Ready, go.
All right. So this really reminded me actually of Foursquare. So, it's rewarding people for instance, it's a loyalty program. And it was funny that I actually expected you to talk about Foursquare and then you were talking about Level Up, but essentially it's talking about, loyalty and returning customers and location-based stuff. And so it reminds me of Foursquare almost in a way, but without the check-in. You're incentivizing folks to come into your location based on the fact that they're offering some sort of special on Square. And you have to actually be an app user, of Square and have a Square account in order to take advantage of it, similar to what you did with the Level Up app. So again, I think it's kind of almost in a way an alternative to Foursquare and to using Foursquare as an incentivizing application for for brands, for loyalty and for folks visiting your store, brick and mortar. 3, 2, 1. All done.
All right, very nice. Got it in the time. All right, and that ends the lightning round. So we hope you enjoyed that. That is always a fun one. A lot of information crammed into just a few short minutes. And with that, we are going to call this episode a wrap. So as always, we are hugely appreciative of the listeners to the show. We want to give a big thanks for listening. We hope that you've enjoyed the show today. We hope that you recommend it to others. We hope that you get a lot of value out of this and that this enhances your day-to-day marketing and advertising. That's really our goal, is to share with you. And so we're very thankful for the people that tune into the live stream, the people that are watching us on YouTube, the people that maybe got a chance to meet us at the Social Loco conference and are now listening to the episodes moving forward. We're really appreciative of you checking it out, and we hope that you get some value out of the show. And if we had one request to make, it would be that you rate us in iTunes. So there's actually a couple of ratings on there, and we really do appreciate that. It helps others discover the show, and especially on things like Apple's newly released podcast app, which I think we're going to cover in a future episode. But if you get a chance to play around with that, you'll notice that it's recommending podcasts to you. How does it do that? It looks at ratings and reviews. So if you enjoy the show, if you get value out of it, the one small request that we have is that you go to iTunes, search for the show, and give it a rating. We would really appreciate that. And if you want to get in touch, we would again, just love to hear from the audience and get a chance to interact with you. If you have questions, if you want to suggest topics, if you have feedback on a specific episode, or even if you just want to say hi, we highly encourage that. So you can do that a couple of different ways. The first and probably most easiest, especially given today's show, is via Twitter. So we can be reached at SoloMo Show. That'll reach both Adam and I. We both check that account. Or you can reach me directly. I'm at Corey O'Brien.
And I'm at Secret Sushi.
We're also available via email. It's solomoshow@gmail.com. Or you can connect with us on Facebook, Google+, and Pinterest. We have accounts or profiles on each one of those networks, so just go ahead and search for SoloMo Show, and we should pop right up. And as with every episode, we do put together a rather comprehensive list of show notes. That's all the stories and links and images and graphics and infographics and basically everything we talk about during the show. We put all that together and link to it so that you can follow along as we're discussing it. And that can be found in a number of places. The easiest is probably just to go to solomoshow.com. Each episode gets its own entry and you can see all the show notes. And then if you're listening to this on a podcast player, there is most likely an option to view show notes. So if you search around, you'll be able to view the show notes. You'll see a number of links to everything that we've talked about today, and we hope that enhances the show as you're listening along. And with that, we will
Corey busts his hump. God, sorry, I just wanted to add to it because I was thinking about it this week. But Corey busts his hump in order to make sure that all these shows are produced to the best that we can here so far, and really does a great job of adding as much value to this with the show notes directly on the podcast and on solomoshow.com as well. So thanks again, Corey, for that. And just wanted to let everybody know to recognize that. And you guys can thank him yourselves with all the places that he just said you can contact us.
There you go. All right. Well, with that glowing recommendation and with this Twitter-focused episode under wraps, we will call it a week and see everyone next week. Thanks for listening.
Take care.